Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Power Platform This and That podcast. My name is Rory Neary, and I'm joined here today by Ben Fetters. Ben works as a Power Platform trainer, in addition to architecting solutions on a consultancy basis. Hello, Ben, and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, absolute pleasure to have you on. Now, this is the first time I've had someone on the podcast that I have not actually met. And we've obviously had a few minutes chatting earlier on, but only a few minutes. So a lot of what we get to in this podcast is going to be live. And I think that it's particularly interesting to think that the platform could be a reason why people might get to talk to each other and connect with each other. And I would really encourage the listeners to do the same and kind of reach out to people and realise that there's some really interesting people out there in the community.
Yeah, for sure. No, yeah, I think as soon as you mention Power Platform to someone, if they're in that world too, there's an instant connection. You already feel like you're buddies, I feel like. So, yeah, that's for sure.
So I would normally do something where I reminisce with people. We have very little to reminisce about.
Yeah.
But I think I seem to recall that I started to see your posts probably only a few months ago. And it just seemed as if every post that you came up with, I thought, oh, that's really good. Yes, that's interesting, and they were on different topics. And I know that your kind of specialism, if you like, is on Canvas apps and Power Automate. Not completely, but I seem to recall the posts that came out, they were quite clear, and I thought, Ben, that's the sort of person I'd like to meet.
That's so great. That's awesome. They honestly, when I've come up with them, I've just thought about like, what is this really awesome thing that I learned forever ago. I just posted about like starting a flow from clicking a button in SharePoint and everything. Yeah. And I think I learned that originally like 5 years ago or something like that. And when I think of posts, it's so funny. I don't know if you do this with your content, but I always think of, oh, I bet everyone will really like this one, and then it doesn't do very good. And then when I come up with a little idea and I'm like, oh, this one's okay, I'll put this out there, then everyone likes that one, and so I just kind of learned to let it go and just post things.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah.
And I think that carousel type format of post that you come up with, and we will put your LinkedIn profile into the show notes, that carousel style post I particularly find a nice way of consuming content, because you know they're not that long, and the person that's kind of publishing it needs to make some decisions about how much information to put on each slide, and typically those sort of slides aren't kind of like full of information. They've actually just got this followed by this followed by this, and maybe they're 10 slides long, but not much more than that.
Right. Yeah. No, yeah. I've tried different things on LinkedIn, and when I saw the carousel slides, I've always thought that same thing, like, oh, this is really nice. I can do this really easily. I just slide through it. It's almost, I think of it kind of like a mini blog post, sort of. And so they're fun. They're fun to make. They still take a while to make, but they're really fun.
But they do. And you've probably seen Anna Black does those as well. You will have seen her do those style
I think
posts.
so. I've seen a few people do
And Clarissa Gillingham, she's starting to do much more of those as well. So I think that style of post is interesting. And do you have like a blog of your own, or do you just post out onto LinkedIn in this way?
Honestly, I've really wanted to branch out to either a blog or YouTube or something, because I like YouTube. I've thought about creating a more in-depth YouTube video off of each of the posts or something like that, or a blog, and I'm trying to find more time to do that, because it is a lot of time. But it's fun though. But yeah.
And I think that with these podcasts, what I'm kind of thinking is that realistically it's about a half a day of effort per podcast, because you record it, and then you have to do like the post-production side of things on it. So by the time you've got, let's say, an hour podcast, you've then got, and I do listen to it as well. I wasn't, funnily enough, I didn't actually listen to the first ones that much. You only feel a bit embarrassed about your own voice and things like that.
Uh-huh.
And what if it's not anyway? But actually, it really is helpful to listen to it. But it does mean that the whole process takes a while.
Yeah.
But I am enjoying it. And oh yes, and one thing I always forget is to say to people, please hit that like and the subscribe. It's great for the channel, and it's good for me as well. And believe me, I don't get that many likes as well. So if you don't like me, like Ben.
There you go. That's awesome.
Yeah, so I guess my content is the more recent version of the content I'm producing. And because I'd kind of gone through this period where I'd not really known what to do. And I wasn't dreaming up these sort of posts that you're coming out with that are really cool. But I just thought I wanted to meet people in the community. And this was a great way of doing it. So, and I'm really interested to hear the things that you come out with when we get to the something old, something new section of the podcast.
Yeah.
So that's something, and I literally don't know what's coming, but I'm really looking forward to it. So, one of the things that I'd like to do is to get you to talk to me and to the audience about how you got into Power Platform, how you got to the point where you are in your career right now. And I think that, it might be that I kind of stop you every so often to kind of dig in a little bit further. And I think that for the benefit of the audience, there's a lot of people trying to get into Power Platform, and maybe they don't think what their experience is completely relevant. But we've seen all sorts of people on the podcast already, and I'd love to hear how you got into Power Platform.
Yeah, no, I love this question. I never thought that I wanted to be in IT or anything technology. I knew I didn't want to be a doctor, and I didn't want to be like a police officer or any of those things, right? And the other one was I knew I didn't want to be in IT. And I remember I served a mission for our church for 2 years in Chile. So I'll move my camera a little bit. So a lot of people mistake that that's very similar to the Texas flag, and everything. Anyway, so that's my Chilean flag, but this will be a fun part of the story. But I came home and I needed a job, and my dad is actually he owns a small Microsoft consulting company. So it was just him and one other person at the time, and he did a lot in SharePoint. And so
and how far back are we now in time?
Oh yeah, so this is that's a good point. So this is 2017 when I came home and was going to continue college and everything. So it's 2017. I needed a job, and my dad said, "Hey, I have all this documentation that I need someone to do for our client." And so I got into SharePoint a little bit and did documentation, and I absolutely hated it. It was not.
I thought you were going to say you loved it. I thought we were going to have to stop the podcast right then.
Oh my gosh! But I think it's because honestly, I didn't understand anything that was going on. My dad just said, "Hey, here's some lists and libraries. Just tell me all the fields and just, put them all down." And just documentation, just very tedious stuff. And I was like, "Yep, I don't want to do this. I can't do this." And a little while, about a year later, I did that with my dad for a little while. And about a year later, I needed a job because I was just getting married, and I was like, well, my dad's he's kind of had all this offer on the table of like, if you ever want to, I always need someone to help me do things. And so he offered it to me again, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna give this another shot. And this time my dad said, hey, there's these new tools that are out, or newer, I guess. It's Power Apps and Power Automate, and I started getting into those, and I loved it. Still, I remember very clearly the day when I built a little Canvas app and I got it to move. I got it to click a button to move the user to the next screen, and I was like, "This is the coolest thing in the world."
Yeah.
And that kind of sold me on it. And so I loved it ever since. And then for my dad's company, it's slowly grown, but he all of a sudden needed people to do Power Apps and to do Power Automate, and so I was kind of the person that I was his only Power Apps person, and so we hopefully I'm not going into too much detail here, but
No. I'm fascinated.
Okay.
I feel like I've got a load of questions coming. So so tell me about your dad's consultancy then. So you guys, you're based in Utah,
right?
Is that where your family's based as well?
Yeah. I was born in North Carolina. My family moved around, or my dad at least moved around a good bit, but we've been in Utah basically my whole life. And so most of the companies in Utah, there's a person in Mexico and Texas and everything. So there's a few remote people that we don't see as much. Yeah. So we're still pretty small. And it's mostly been around lots of things with SharePoints and doing SharePoint framework things. Yeah. So I don't do the SharePoint framework things, but one of the first projects we did that has lasted forever is SharePoint Designer was going away. And and that was a big way of how we used to do our workflows. SharePoint Designer, for those that don't know, is kind of like an automation tool inside of SharePoint that lets you send emails, and it's kind of like a mini version of Power Automate, right? I feel like it doesn't do as much as Power Automate, but it's like it'll handle approval processes and things like that. And so that was going away, and we probably had 30 to 40 of these workflows, and so we had to switch them to Power Automate, and I was the Power Automate guy, and my dad said everyone needs to know, like, we need to learn this, and so I trained our internal people on Power Automate, and we kind of built out all these workflows, and that was a fun project. And as time has gone on, I've just always needed to be the Power Apps guy, the Power Automate guy, the whatever guy to help do these things and everything. And so that's how I really got into it. And it was so interesting because I was like, as I was getting into it, right, I always had this belief of I'm never going to be in IT for, I don't know why I ever had that idea, but as I got into it, it really changed my mind on how things are, and meeting with people in the community and talking to people at conferences and user groups, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is a super fun world. I just love making things easier for people, and I feel like the Power Platform really, really does that. So I'll pause right.
And it does occur to me, because one of the reasons for doing the backstory is to kind of show people how they can get into Power Platform. So I think the message is, make sure your dad has got a Microsoft consultancy.
Yeah, and I was gonna, that's true. That, oh my gosh! So that when you said that, I was like, well, I feel like my story is a little different, but oh my gosh, that's
but everyone, you've only got one. You've only got your own story. That's what you have. So you just work with what you've got.
Yeah.
So yes, you developed a level of expertise going from. Have those designers gone? Have they been deprecated, or I imagine they're probably living on in some way in certain parts of SharePoint?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like same with InfoPath. Did you ever do InfoPath forms? Right.
I was waiting for you to say that. Funny
really?
enough.
Okay.
So for the benefit of the audience, InfoPath is a forms designer. I never made them actually, but it's essentially a way of developing forms specific to SharePoint.
Yeah.
At the time when I got involved with Power Platform, the conversation was like, we don't want to use InfoPath, we want to use Power Apps. and that's that's what's.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, and I mean, I'm very similar. When I started doing things with my dad, we were doing InfoPath forms, and so I learned InfoPath for, I mean, less than a year probably, and we switched over to doing Power Apps. But the one thing I liked about InfoPath forms that I feel like, I mean, you can of course do this in Power Apps, but in InfoPath you could basically just set a field's value. If something changed, you could just say, hey, make the status be this, and it would just set that value to whatever you wanted it to be. And I always thought that was really nice. But but anyways, yeah, Power Apps I feel like is awesome. But what was I saying? With things getting deprecated, I feel like they kept saying InfoPath was going to get deprecated, and then they'd kind of push it back even further. And that was how it was, I think, with SharePoint Designer is we thought it was going away, and then maybe it went away, maybe it didn't. I think it officially went away now. I'm pretty sure you can't do it. Someone could correct me on that, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's probably not something that you would go back to anyway.
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
I think in fairness, life has probably moved on quite a bit since then. You know.
Yeah.
Okay, so you then ended up having a level of expertise in Power Apps and in Power Automate, but I suspect that's probably still at least a few years back, and life has changed even since then.
Right, yeah. So our company started to grow a little bit more, and now we actually have another Power Apps person on the team, and I will explain how he landed a job with us. At least hopefully that's helpful. But he was in school or just getting out of school, and he needed an internship actually to graduate. We hired him, and he started getting into doing Power Apps and Power Automate, and I kind of taught him some things and worked on a really fun project with him, replacing a lot of DocuSign forms with Power Apps, which was that was a really fun project. So
that's very interesting.
He kind of dove in right away on these pretty complex things, but then we ended up needing him, and he stayed with us after his internship ended. We needed him, and I've noticed that in the Power Platform job world is sometimes people start out as an intern and then turn into an employee there and things. That's all I can really say with that, I guess. But so
it strikes me that whatever way you cut it, you need a certain level of determination in order to kind of get that first in an organisation. And I guess theoretically there was a time when they talked about how many million apps needed to be built by a certain period of time, and there weren't enough developers. And it strikes me that the need for apps still exists, and there still aren't enough developers. So it would still seem to me to be a growing market, but maybe the expectations on quality have changed in that time, in terms of what does good look like. Before it was kind of like the apps looked okay, and now they need to look a bit more beautiful.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot too with working with different clients. They'll say, how do your apps look? Do they look like most Canvas apps look, or do you make them look a little better? And that's kind of now one of the requirements that people like. Yeah. But I've noticed that too with this big influx of not only app builders, but specifically the Power Platform world.
Yeah.
I've noticed a shift of companies that they're not wanting to pay for software so much and pay subscriptions. They're wanting to leverage their Microsoft subscriptions and build something custom that really works for them, which is what they did with the DocuSign thing. And I've just noticed that more and more companies trying to really build something more custom for them. And I think that's a fun world to be in, where things are a little more custom and tailored to each company.
Yeah, and I guess what that really means is there is quite a lot of competition between, it does, look, at the end of the day, a lot of companies will turn their computers on in the morning, and it'll be Microsoft 365.
Right.
Will be their entry point into their working day.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think for sure.
And so therefore getting an additional bit to that in the form of Power Apps licensing is not so great a journey compared to, I don't know, doing something completely bespoke where you've presumably got to have users and licensing and permissions and all those sorts of things.
Right, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I feel like some things, software is just, and doing a subscription. We work a lot with cities, or we've worked a lot with a few different cities, and we've just noticed that they're leaning further away from, software that's really expensive. It's charging them not only subscriptions, but maybe like a certain percentage of what it's managing, right? If they manage like $100 million in projects, it'll take 0.5% of that or something, which is kind of a lot of money if you're handling a lot of projects. And so I've noticed a lot of companies saying, "Oh, we don't want to do that. We want to build on Microsoft or wherever, and just kind of make it our own thing." And it's an interesting world for sure.
And I guess that's that one of the issues there is that you may be paying for functionality you don't need, whereas typically when you're building an app, you are building only the functionality that you need.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like, and even if if the software does do what you're wanting it to, you always want to tweak it just a little bit, right? I remember talking to a few different companies where they would say, "Yeah, we use this software, but every day we always think, oh, if it could only do this thing," and so on. And so I feel like people always end up wanting something custom. Maybe not always, but a lot of the times they want something more custom and tailored to them. Maybe I'm a little biased, probably, but oh man.
And are you working much with model-driven apps?
I don't. I'll just answer your question right there. But I don't work too much with model-driven apps. We have like partners that if the project seems like it's going in the model-driven app direction, we'll have them kind of come on and help with that. I've been in Dataverse, SharePoint, some SQL, and Canvas apps, Power Automate. That's been my whole world, and now Copilot is coming into that world too, which is really fun. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
And so, but when we first teed up this podcast, I talked about you being a Power Platform trainer. So how does that now weave itself into the things that Ben Fetters does?
Well, I feel like as I've gone more into this training route, to be honest, I've thought, okay, if I am going to train all of the Power Platform, I either need to make sure I know these other parts that I don't do as much, or bring in someone that does know those parts really well. And that's been kind of my plan, is I want to make sure I know enough about everything, but someone that's really passionate about model-driven apps, that's their whole world. That would be more of a fun thing, to bring in someone that says, hey, this person, I'm the Canvas guy, the Power Automate guy, the other stuff guy. This person's the model-driven app person. They'll be, they're the main. They love that. They love training that. That's kind of my future vision for it and everything.
And it is fascinating to think that there is this route that people get into Power Platform, which is essentially the SharePoint route. That is a route to get into it. And arguably that's kind of the route I've taken in. Yeah. But there's also the Dynamics route into Power Platform, because Dataverse and the Dataverse database is Dynamics anyway. So there's that route in. And I think you might find yourself pleasantly surprised when you start building using a Dataverse database because the tables are so easy to create and they make so much sense, and they have certain field types that are quite interesting to work with. So I'd really encourage you to. And the people that some of the audience I'm imagining are people who've been on the Power Up program. Now, the Microsoft Power Up program only uses Dataverse, so that is our database, and it's the most practical database for them to use. And so initially they build a model-driven app with relationships and so on, and then they build a Canvas app on top of it, as well as a Power Automate, Cloud Flows and so on, and Power BI reports. So it's kind of a full, it's not detailed in every respect, but it does represent a good chunk of Power Platform.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I feel like, I mean, we use Dataverse with Canvas apps a good bit. And it does make it a little more, some of the functions or things with Power Automate it's a little more complex, but it works so well. I love just being able to not worry too much or as much about delegation things. I'm not quite as limited as you are with SharePoint. And that's been one of my favorite parts about using Dataverse, is just how fast it is, how easy it is with things. Yeah.
And the other thing is that if you get into using model-driven apps and so on, you can start to see the GUIDs and so on.
Yeah.
And the reason why the GUIDs are important is because the GUIDs become relevant when you're building your Power Automate Cloud Flows, because you can go, that's the GUID. So when you're looking at your Power Automate Cloud Flow and you're looking at a run, you go, I've got that number. And I can see that number in my model-driven app, so it's definitely the right record. In which case, I'm doing the right thing to the right record and so on. So I really geek out on the GUIDs. It's not like I know them all, but I mean, but they, the equivalent to a GUID in Dataverse is it's an ID field in SharePoint. It's a unique column. It's just that in Dataverse it's 36 characters long, whereas in SharePoint it's a number.
Right. Yeah.
And so you've done quite a bit of training then.
Yeah, I've always loved training. I've done a few different online courses. So I've done a course for Cloud Academy. I've done a few courses for Pluralsight now. Pluralsight's a fun. They're awesome.
I've done a course on Pluralsight as well.
Oh really? Okay, that's cool. That's funny. I love that. I like how they've really helped me improve my audio and improve the quality of things. So they want it really nice, and so it's very helpful actually. I have little sound stuff above me and everything.
Very good.
I mean, they're not. I know people can spend a lot of money. I went pretty cheap. I wouldn't be surprised if one of them fell on me during the...
It's not marshmallows, is it?
No, yeah. That's awesome. Oh man. But yeah, now I've done a few kind of one-off virtual trainings or in-person trainings. I've done a few of those. I've done some trainings with just people at one company and everything. But I started to realize I wanted to go into the training route, especially when I've trained people inside our own company. When the designer was going away and I had to train our people in Power Automate, I was like, this is really fun. I really like doing this. And so I always knew I wanted to kind of go in this training direction at some point. And just helping people get into the Power Platform world and feel comfortable in it. And I think like you were saying, there's a few different routes, and I've noticed there's that lots of the times it's the SharePoint route or the Dynamics route. I tend to relate more with the SharePoint route because I came in that way too, right through SharePoint, and it's a fun world. It's fun to kind of relive that moment of when I first got into Power Apps and to see people that aren't professional developers build an app for a first time, or build a build a flow, or automate something. It's kind of like magic. I've talked to someone before, and they're like, this is like magic to people that aren't in that development world or in that IT world very much. It's super fun. So that's why I've loved it so much.
So before I get on to the something old, something new section, one thing I'd be really interested to know about in your part of the world is, what do user groups look like? Because obviously local in terms of, the UK isn't that big. And so, there's groups in Manchester, Birmingham, Milton Keynes, Oxford, London, there are tons of... So I think because we're much more densely populated, and then there are more groups more locally. But what is life like for yourself in terms of being able to go to groups that are in person?
I feel like it used to be more exciting before COVID hit.
Uh-huh.
I think a lot more I think that COVID had a big impact on the user groups. Yeah. I feel like when I used to go, we would go to a big building, or a company would kind of host the user group meeting, and there'd be food there, and we'd go in, and there'd be a good amount of people there, 20 to 30 or more people, and we'd talk and network and eat food and watch the presentation. But now it is at least where I'm at, I guess is all I can say. But now it is a small group of like 8 people around in a tiny little conference room, and then everyone else is virtual, and that's mostly what it's like. The one thing I will say, though, is I was on the Scottish Power Platform user group, and
I was going to ask you about that. Okay, we'll come on to that in a minute. Go for it.
I really like how they did that. I really like how they do multiple speakers and give them a little thing, because when we do it with our user group, it's one person for like an hour or however long, and I think anyone starts to lose focus if it's an hour long. But doing the 15-minute or however long, that's really nice. I really like that model a lot. I feel like I'm going to suggest that.
And so how did you get onto the Scottish Summit?
How did that happen? I think they just reached out to me and asked me if I would like to speak. Yep.
That's probably got something to do with all your LinkedIn things, and in that case.
Yeah, and that's been a really fun part about LinkedIn that I never really thought about too much, was just all the fun connections I've made and the fun friends and talking to people. It's made me think of LinkedIn a lot differently. I think of it as one big virtual networking, make friends world. And so that's kind of been my view of it with posting all the time. Is me posting is kind of like showing up at a big networking event and having a sign up saying, look at this cool thing in Power Apps, and come talk to me and let's talk about Power Apps or whatever it is. And so it's been really cool. I'm really grateful for all the people I've met and friends I've made through LinkedIn, which I never thought I would ever say that, honestly.
And I think that, I keep coming back to the audience, and clearly there's nothing stopping anyone doing a LinkedIn post. And then maybe the flip side to that is that those carousel type posts, they land quite well. How are you authoring those? Are you authoring those in PowerPoint, or are you using Canva? What's your workflow for that?
I use Canva. I love Canva so much.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, but you create a PDF in Canva, and when you load the PDF into LinkedIn, it converts it into like the slideshow thing.
Oh, that's lovely.
And which is really cool. It's super fun. And they have templates. I started with a template and kind of slowly tweaked it as time has gone on. But Canva is the best. I love it so much.
It's good fun, isn't it?
It's fun. Yeah.
It's also slightly strange at the same time.
Yeah.
As in, like, where is stuff?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you get a photo?
Yeah. Man. No,
Okay, so let's go and head into the something old, something new section of the podcast. So this is more structured, where you come, the questions are set, and you come at the questions from your own perspective. And so we start with something old in Power Platform, something new, something borrowed, something blue, and I'll get you to finish off with a blow your own trumpet about something you think you're really happy with, and so on. So if I can start you off with something old in Power Platform that you still think is cool.
What I see, I was thinking about all these. Now my brain is not. Oh, that's right. Okay, this is what So one of the old things is the barcode scanner.
Oh, yes.
I feel like that was something I thought was so cool when I first started, and
Yeah.
it is super neat. I actually, one of the first apps that I built, I was like, what can I use the barcode scanner for? Like, I don't.
And that's a good way of thinking about building apps.
Yeah.
I want to use this control.
Yeah, how can I use this? Oh my gosh. And it was real. Honestly, those projects are super fun though, even though if you're like, oh, I've never used this control, let's build something with using this, and you learn so much, I feel like. But I got the barcode scanner and I got it to work, and I just scanned something like in my office or in the house, and it gives a little code, and I was like, how can I use this? And I ended up making an app that searches for an item on Amazon when you scan it. And so I would we'd be at a family.
That's cool.
It was kind of cool. And sometimes it wouldn't find it, but a lot of the times it would find it. And I remember thinking I was so awesome and being at a family reunion and saying, hey, do you want to see my cool app that I can scan the pack of gum and tell you how much it costs? But that one, when you mentioned the something old, I was like, oh yeah, that was just a funny memory that I have of that.
But it is interesting that clearly not enough things get airtime just because there are so many things. But it's very interesting that you've landed on the barcode scanner as being your kind of like, hey, this thing doesn't get enough love.
Yeah, no, for sure. That thing's really cool. I know there's some other things in there. Putting in a map and doing the map with the different pins. That's really neat. I mean, that's something that I haven't seen too much of, which I guess it's not always needed, of course. Just some of those older controls are really neat, I feel like. So I just like those. Those are some of those things that make it feel really magical when you're first getting into it.
I tell you what, if I reckon that there's something that I came across, and believe it was when I was working at a client's, and he showed me that there's this, essentially it's a website where you can build charts. Now, what happens in the app is it's actually, I think it's something like a HTML text control. I think.
Like SVG.
And then, and then what you do is you effectively fire that at the website, and you tell it, like, I don't know, you probably tell it the different dimensions of the table, because every graphic can be represented as a table. So you just basically tell it that, and it will return a pretty nice looking graphic. And actually, graphics in Power Apps are generally pretty difficult, aren't they? The charts, they've got some chart controls, and they're pretty nasty.
Right. Yeah.
I'll have to drop that out to you because I think you'll find it really interesting.
No, that's super cool. I feel that sounds really familiar, but I would love that. I feel like that's one of the tricky parts to get right, is any time you need to do some type of charting or anything inside of the app is always kind of tricky. But no, yeah, please do. That'd be awesome. That'd be cool. We'll do a post about it together.
Yeah, indeed. So something old, something new.
Something new, I feel like I'll say, well, I'll do a runner-up is the containers, the new containers they've added. I love that you can add drop shadows with them to make it kind
Yes.
of pop off the page. That was something when they added that I was just so excited because you had to do that with a little HTML control
Right.
before if you wanted
Yeah.
any drop
Yeah.
shadows type things. But now I think my first place is this is I'm gonna call it new. It feels new still, but the search, being able to search in the app with the little magnifying glass over on the
So
left.
is this from the perspective of the designer experience?
Yeah, that's at least what I've thought.
Yeah, so you're in the app and you've got, I don't know, 500 controls or something like that, all dotted around the app, and you're thinking, oh dear, I shouldn't have called it this. I should really have called it some other thing.
Yeah.
And then you can search for that, and then you can actually. I assume that it's also being able to do the replace as well. Is
Right.
I don't know
Yeah.
if it's changing the name if of it is also useful.
Yeah, I think that addition was super nice because I would also say like, oh, where I have this variable, I have this certain piece.
Yeah.
Where is that at? And if I need to change it, I want to make sure that I've changed it everywhere else that
Yeah.
I need to. And so, anyways, I know there's different ways to do that now, but I feel like that search thing is such a simple, nice thing that they added that I've loved so much to be and just to know what's going on in your app easier.
And it was so much of a scale up compared to what was there before. Like you could search before,
Yeah,
but it was
right.
quite limited in terms of maybe you could. I even can't even remember how limited it was, but it was more the fact that you kind of like this was, this came in at, I don't know, the initial search came in as an F if you like, and then this thing is coming out as like an A star because it's it really is like I can't think of anything else you would want it to do sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I've loved that. I don't know why I thought of that, but that one is awesome. There's probably some other ones. I am liking the new designer experience in Power Automate. I don't know if it was like this for you, but it was very difficult to just switch to it and use it more because I was so used to the old way. So my brain is like still switching to it. But I do like a lot of the things they've added with it. Quality of just the formula bar where you type in the expressions being bigger. That alone is just really nice. That's still sort of new, but anyways.
And I think in my case, I'm a bit sort of hampered by the fact I've used what I've used for so long that I know literally where I can click, and there are some quirky elements to it, but what the quirky elements are.
Yeah.
The formula bar is terrible because nobody writes formulas that small. I mean, there's someone there in Microsoft that basically about 5 years ago said no, all boxes must be way smaller than they could ever possibly need to be.
Right. Yeah.
And because there was never a reason for it to be that small. But anyway, they probably didn't even think people would use the expressions or something.
Yeah, or that they wouldn't be that complicated or something.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Can I share a
So
quick
yeah, I
story
agree with you that I mean I really tried hard to transition over, and I'm kind of still getting it. There are some quirky elements to both of them. There are actually some things that one does that the other one doesn't do, and so on. And I seem to recall, maybe they both suffer this, but like finding environment variables in either of them can be tricky.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it'll appear, sometimes it doesn't appear. And and I think the way to make them appear is to save it, go out and go back in again.
Yep, that's what I've done. Yep.
And you think, but then and of course as a trainer you must think, well, how am I going to train that?
Yeah, I know, and I that's those quirky things are always interesting to explain. I feel like, and you have to tell them, this is how it works. This is how it is. It's a little weird.
Yeah.
But can I tell you a quick story with?
Go for it. Yeah, please do.
With expressions. So when I was first doing Power Automate, I needed to format a number as currency and make it just look like currency. And this was before they had the format number expression.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I have it still, but I had to I had to type out a whole expression to format a number, and the number I was getting back could have decimals, it could not have decimals, it could be in the tens of
Yeah.
millions. And so I had to make sure I put the commas in the right
Yeah,
place
yeah,
and
yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And it is just this giant long expression. And I was like, oh my gosh, I finally did this. And like 2 weeks later, they announced that the formula, the format number expression came out. And I was like, my gosh, that could have come out a little sooner and that would have been helpful. But anyways, that was the fun time.
And it's funny if you think about it, because I guess nowadays, if you had to do the same thing and they hadn't got the format number thing, you'd probably just throw it into Chat GPT or something and then
Right.
just say, go and do this thing.
Yeah, that's true. Which I've used. Have you used it too much with? I've used it with expressions, mostly with Power Automate. I feel like
Yeah.
I don't want to manipulate this text and it needs to be
Yeah.
a certain way, and I'll just throw it in there. And it's been helpful to see how Copilot or ChatGPT does it, because sometimes it'll do it in a way that I might not have thought to do it, and it'll be like, oh, that's a little easier or whatever. So that's been
Yeah.
cool. That's
And then sometimes it just invents expressions that don't exist.
yeah. You're like, well, that'd be nice if that existed.
Yeah. Do you know one thing that is odd? I'm conscious of time, but I'm really enjoying the chat. But
Yeah.
Concat, right? Concat
Yeah.
in Power Automate is fundamentally different to Concat in Power Apps.
Yeah.
So Concat and Power Automate is like how to join two strings, I think.
Yeah.
And
I think
Concat
so.
in Power Apps is you look down a column in a table and you basically kind of
Like put in a row. or
append
put
them
it-
to
yeah.
I think it just appends them to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. But interesting how, that'll probably never change. I can't see why it would.
Yeah.
But interesting that those two things exist.
Yeah. That's
So
good.
something old, something new, something borrowed. This is something from someone else that you think is cool.
I feel like this will be a shout out to. So I followed Audrey Gordon for a while. Something I really love still about her content. I remember about, I guess it's a while ago, 7 years ago or whatever,
Yeah.
watching some of her videos, and something I always really liked is she explained things kind of like how we've talked about, where as if you didn't really know anything about that. I remember she once explained in Power Automate where you put when you always put a question mark, right, when you're typing
Yes.
out, you're
Yeah.
referencing something.
Yeah.
She explained why you have a question mark, that that allows that value to, it might exist or it might not, and I was like, no one's ever explained that. They've always just typed in, and here's how you type it, and you just put a question mark, and my brain was always like, why do you put a question mark? Like, why do you put curly brackets instead of the straight brackets, or just whatever? That's how when I was first learning, that's what my mind
And
was
to be
always
fair, I
like.
think I've learned most of that by osmosis.
Yeah.
And do you know the thing that really opened doors for me in terms of, I think we're really talking about Power Automate here. What really opened doors for me was about maybe 2 years into using Power Automate. Someone said, "Oh, you can use the compose expression, the compose action, and just throw something in there, something from the previous step, and then you go." And then you can see all of the JSON that relates to the thing. And of course, if you know your data, then you know what it's telling you, and you know why that the square brackets open the array and the curly brackets open the record.
Yeah.
And it makes sense at that point. But then the reason why that is cool is because when we do our patch statements, it's in a similar. We have the curly brackets, I believe.
Right.
So the structure of a patch statement in a Power Apps, using the Power Apps command, is written in a similar way, that kind of JSON style
Yeah.
fashion.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I feel like, and that's good. I think that's great advice to look at the data and start to understand it, to not just assume that it's doing something that you think it should, and to be able to see it and using the compose to really take a look at what the flow is doing can help help you understand things so much better. Yeah,
always use that. So we'll have to try and see if we can find a video from Audrey Gordon, but I think it'll be quite from quite a while ago, because I don't think I've seen many from her.
Yeah, I think so.
So something else. Oh, my favourite bit. So this something blue is something in Power Platform that every time you see it drives you a little bit nuts, and you think, why could it not just be that little bit better?
My brain probably could think of a few things, which is sad. But the one that has come up probably the most.
Okay.
And maybe this is said a lot, I don't know, but I feel like the modern controls are they're so awesome. They look so much better, and they work, a lot of the times they work better too, but they still can't do everything we need them to just yet, right? And I think one of the biggest ones I encounter is that I still stick to a lot of the classic controls. It kind of depends. But one of the things that I like about classic controls is you can set a variable to just reset all of the controls at once.
Okay.
And the modern controls don't have a reset property to just let you just reset all the controls. You have to manually type in the reset function for every single control that you want to reset with the modern controls, if I explain that all right. But and I know each one has a little bit of quirkiness with it too they're still working out. But I mean, I really like the buttons. The buttons are really neat. They're
lovely, aren't they? Yeah.
They are so nice. I don't know what I can't. Sometimes my mind can't exactly explain why they feel better, but. Anyways, I really like the buttons. I like a lot of them, but they're so close. I think they're really close on them, getting them working all the way there. But that was my thing that I thought of.
I think perhaps the issue is it's a big package, isn't it? You've either got modern controls working or you haven't, and they have so many controls, so they might be at like 98.5%. But like, for example, in the is it like something like a combo box control?
Yeah.
I don't think you can sort the contents of the combo box control. So it'll always, you might think, oh, I want it to come out, in this order because this is relevant to my organisation. It'll just go, thank you. It's coming out alphabetically, by the way.
Yeah, right.
Or whatever order makes most sense to it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Understood. And hopefully there's a Power Apps Microsoft developer somewhere out there. Very unlikely for this to get all the way through, but I don't think we're saying anything they haven't already heard. And so coming on to Blow Your Own Trumpet then. So tell me about something that you're particularly proud of having done.
I feel like I probably always mention the DocuSign process of creating all these approval forms, but the other one I would mention is I've worked on a project management solution, and so my dad's company is called Sovereign SP, and so we call it Sovereign Hub, and it's kind of like our project management thing. And it's we've worked with a lot of companies that kind of revolve around projects or just something they're trying to track. And so we've come up with an awesome way of just tracking the documents and all the processes related to the projects. And I've had a really fun time doing that in Power Apps, where how I've structured it is I have one app that manages the creating a new project and viewing a list of all the projects. But once you actually click on a project, it opens up a Project Home app, and it just shows you the information for the project that you selected. And it has all your documents there, and everything's kind of nice and organized and things. And it's just been that's been one of the funnest solutions to work on with managing projects and approvals. Approvals, I'd say, is a big part of my world, is doing approval processes and things. And so I feel like working with our team over these years, we've honed in on doing that and doing approval processes in a good way and managing projects in a good way. And so that's been a really fun thing to see how it impacts different companies and everything. How we actually worked with Salt Lake City, the capital of Utah, where I'm at, and so they've with one of their departments in the city, and it's really helped them do a lot more projects than they were able to do. And it was during a time right when COVID hit, and they were luckily able to all work from home because of this this system we built for them allowed them to just work from home and not rely on paper so much and things like that. And so that's been really fun. That's been just an awesome solution to really work on and everything. And so I've posted a little bit about it and kind of like how it's built a little bit, because I think it's cool to learn different ways of building kind of a bit bigger of a solution and when to separate apps out a little bit and things like that. And so anyways, that's me blowing my own horn, I guess. I'm not used to that.
So I assume it's a SharePoint based app, as in the data, the documents, etc., all based in SharePoint. And then obviously from a licensing point of view, using SharePoint, so no issues there.
Yeah, and I mean, it could work. I've done a few other solutions where the documents are in SharePoint and then the rest of the data is in Dataverse, and it'll even start to, it can start to connect to their CRM and their Dynamics world, and it kind of, comes from Dynamics as it's a proposed project or a proposed project. It turns into a real project, and then that kind of eventually comes into our system. And anyways, that whole big flow of things. But yeah.
Cool.
There you go.
Right. So we've actually covered there's been quite a lot of content, I think, in terms of us talking, getting into some detail on the tech side of things. So for those people that are listening now, the rest of this podcast won't be technical. And we're just gonna kind of have a little bit of fun on our way out of the podcast. And so one of the things I like to do is to ask people what their desert island disc would be. Now, I don't know about you. I was telling this lad I was playing football with the other day, and I said, "Oh, I do desert island disc." He didn't know what a desert island disc was. I said, "Oh, it's a radio show, and you say what things you would bring with you on your desert island, what music you would bring, and talk about why it was." But I thought it was interesting. So hopefully you do actually know what a desert island disc is, unless you could go frisbee.
Yeah, there you go.
So go for it. Tell us about your desert island disc.
Well, honestly, I just thought of my two songs, which is super hard. But I'll have my runners up. But I love Hans Zimmer, the composer with. He is just awesome. I love. Gosh, he's got a lot of really good soundtracks. So I'm big into movies and books and everything. So I love his music. But I don't know if I could listen to that all day long. But the other one is did I mention these to you already? I can't remember if I said these to you. Okay,
you told me what you were gonna do.
Okay. So my other one was Mr. Blue Sky Electric Light Orchestra, I think is who I listened to that with my dad on a camping trip on repeat for about 30 times, so he always jokes about that with me, but that's always a good one. I'm someone who, when I like a song, I listen to it on repeat for like 2 weeks until...
and I noticed that about myself, actually. So let me see if I can ever go at this. Okay. sun is shining in the sky. There ain't a cloud inside. It stopped raining, everybody's in a play. Don't you know? It's a beautiful new day. Hey, hey. That's it.
Well, that's awesome.
It's a really cool. I really like the start of it because actually, if you do the start in the F chord here,
Yeah.
because you can play the top bit of the F chord and then the bottom bit, and then you can get really into it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast, Ben. Have you got any things that you want to bring up before, or any things you wanted to say to people trying to get into Power Platform before we sign off?
I think just thanks for having me so much. This is so great. I feel like any advice or things to people is to make friends, go to user groups if you can, go to conferences if you can, and enjoy the journey of learning it and having fun, making people's lives easier, and enjoying the rest of your career with it, I guess is what I would say. But no, yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Well, I have really enjoyed having you on, and I'm going to play us out with Stick Season. Have you heard Stick Season?
I don't think so.
Well, do you know what? I don't know where the guy is from. I know he must be from Vermont. We'll see anyway. As you promised me that I was worth all the miles combined, you must have had yourself a change of heart, like halfway down the drive, 'cause your voice trailed out exactly as you passed my exit sign. Kept on driving straight and left our future tree to the right.